Yolanda the old ants lounge in the white wicker armchairs, flipping open their fans, snapping them shut. Except that more of them are dressed in the grays and blacks of widowhood, the ants seem little changed since 5 years ago when Yolanda was last on the island. Sitting among the ants in the less comfortable dining chairs, the cousins are flashes of color in turquoise jumpsuits and tight jersey dresses. The cake is on its own table, the little cousins clustered around it, arguing over who will get what slice. When their squabbles reach a certain mother-annoying level, they are called away by their nursemaids, who sit on stools at the far end of the patio, a phalanx of starched white uniforms. Before anyone has turned to greet her in the entryway, Yolanda sees herself as they will, shabby in a black cotton skirt and jersey top, sandals on her feet, her wild black hair held back with a hairband. Like a missionary, her cousins will say. Like one of those Peace Corps girls who have let themselves go so as to do dubious good in the world. A maid peeks out of the pantry into the hall. She is a skinny brown woman in the black uniform of the kitchen help. Her head is covered with tiny braids coiled into rounds and pinned down with bobby pins. Dona Carmen / she calls to Yolanda's hostess aunt, there are no matches. Justo went to Dona Lucinda's to get some. Por Dios, Illuminata / Tia Carmen scolds, you've had all day. The maid stares down at the interlaced hands she holds before her, a gesture that Yolanda remembers seeing illustrated in a book for Renaissance actors. These clasped hands were on a page of classic gestures. The gesture of pleading, the caption had read. Held against the breast, next to the heart, the same interlaced hands were those of a lover who pleadeth for mercy from his beloved. The gathering spots Yolanda. Her cousin Lucinda leads a song of greeting with an off-key chorus of little cousins. Here she comes, Miss America. Yolanda clasps her brow and groans melodramatically as expected. The chorus labors through the first phrase and then rushes forward with hugs, kisses, and from a couple of the boys' fake karate kicks. You look terrible, Lucinda says. Too thin, and the hair needs a cut. Nothing personal. She is the cousin who has never minced her words. In her designer pantsuit and frosted, blown out hair, Lucinda looks like a Dominican magazine model, a look that has always made Yolanda think of call girls. Light the candles, the little cousins say, taking up a chant. Tia Carmen lifts her open hands to heaven, a gesture she no doubt picked up from one of her priest friends. The girl forgot the matches. The help. Every day worse, Tia Flor confides to Yolanda, flashing her famous smile. The cousins refer to their Tia Flor as, the politician. She is capable of that smile no matter the circumstances. Once, the story goes, during who knows which revolution, a radical young uncle and his wife showed up at Tia Flor's in the middle of the night wanting asylum. Tia Flor greeted them at the door with the smile and, how delightful of you to stop by. Let me tell you about the latest at my house, Tia Flor goes on. The chauffeur was driving me to my novena yesterday. Suddenly the car jerks forward and dies, right there on the street. I'm alarmed, you know, the way things are, a big car stalled in the middle of the university barrio. I say, Caesar, what can it bell? He scratches his head. / don't know, Dona Flor. A nice man stops to help, checks it all and says, why, Senora, you're out of gas. Out of gas. Can you imagine? Tia Flor shakes her head at Yolanda. A chauffeur who can't keep a car in gasoline. Welcome home to your little island. Grinning, she flips open her fan. Beautiful wild birds unfold their silver wings. At a proprietary yank from one of the little cousins, Yolanda lets herself be led to the cake table, festive with a lacy white tablecloth and starched party napkins. She shows surprise at the cake in the shape of the island. Mommy thought of it / Lucinda's little girl explains, beaming. We're going to light candles all over / another little cousin adds. Her face has a ghostly resemblance to one of Yolanda's generation. This one has to be Carmencita's daughter. Not all over / an older brother says, correcting her. The candles are just for the big cities. All over. Carmencita's reincarnation insists. Right, Mommy, all over. She addresses a woman whose aging face is less familiar to Yolanda than the child's facsimile. Carmencita. Yolanda cries out. I wasn't recognizing you before. Older, not wiser. Carmencita's quip in English is the product of her 2 or 3 years away in boarding school in the States. Only the boys stay for college. Carmencita continues in Spanish, we thought we'd welcome you back with an island cake. 5 candles, Lucinda counts. 1 for each year you've been away. 5 major cities, the little know-it-all cousin calls out. No, his sister contradicts. Their mother bends down to negotiate. Yolanda and her cousins and aunts sit down to await the matches. The late sun sifts through the bougainvillea train to climb the walls of the patio, to thread across the trellis roof, to pour down magenta and purple blossoms. Tia Carr. Men's patio is the gathering place for the compound. She is the widow of the head of the clan and so hers is the largest house. Through well-tended gardens beyond her patio, narrow stone paths diverge. After cake and cafecitos, the cousins will disperse down these paths to their several compound houses. There they will supervise their cooks in preparing supper for the husbands, who will troop home after happy hour. Once a male cousin bragged that this pre-dinner hour should be called whore hour. He was not reluctant to explain to Yolanda that this is the hour during which a Dominican male of a certain class stops in on his mistress on his way home to his wife. 5 years, Tia Carmen says, sighing. We're going to have to really spoil her this time. Tia cocks her head to imply collaboration with the other aunts and cousins, so she doesn't stay away so long again. It's not good, Tia Flor says. You 4 girls get lost up there. Smiling, she indicates the sky with her chin. So how are you 4 Jills? Lucinda asks, a wink in her eyes. Back in their adolescent days during summer visits, the 4 girls used to shock their island cousins with stories of their escapades in the States. In halting Spanish, Yolanda reports on her sisters. When she reverts to English, she is scolded, "Gen Español." The more she practices, the sooner she'll be back into her native tongue, the aunts insist. Yes, and when she returns to the States, she'll find herself suddenly going blank over some word in English or, like her mother, mixing up some common phrase. This time, however, Yolanda is not so sure she'll be going back. But that is a secret. Tell us now exactly what you want to do while you're here, says Gabriella, the beautiful young wife of Mundin, the prince of the family. With the pale skin and dramatic dark eyes of a romantic heroine, Gabriella's face reminds Yolanda of the lover's clutch of hands over the breast. But, Gabriella herself is refreshingly straightforward. If you don't have plans, believe me, you'll end up with a lot of invitations you can't turn down. Any little antojo, you must tell us. Tia Carmen agrees. What's an antojo? Yolanda asks. See. Her aunts are right. After so many years away, she is losing her Spanish. Actually, it's not an easy word to explain. Tia Carmen exchanges a quizzical look with the other aunts. How to put it? An antojo is like a craving for something you have to eat. Gabriella blows out her cheeks. Calories. An antojo, one of the older aunts continues, is a very old Spanish word, from before your United States was even thought of, she adds tartly. In fact, in the countryside, you'll still find some campesinos using the word in the old sense. Altagracia, she calls to one of the maids sitting at the other end of the patio. A tiny, old woman, her hair pulled back tightly in a white bun, approaches the group of women. She is asked to tell Yolanda what an antojo is. She puts her brown hands away in her uniform pockets. Utek sabe, Altagracia says in a small voice. You're the one to know. Come now, Altagracia, her mistress scolds. The maid obeys. In my campo we say a person has an antojo when they are taken over by un santo who wants something. Altagracia backs away, and when not recalled, turns, and heads back to her stool. I'll tell you what my santo wants after 5 years, Yolanda says. I can't wait to eat some guavas. Maybe I can pick some when I go north in a few days. By yourself. Tia Carmen shakes her head at the mere thought. This is not the States/Tia Flor says, with a knowing smile. A woman just doesn't travel alone in this country. Especially these days. She'll be fine. Gabriella speaks with calm authority. Mundin will be gone if you want to borrow one of our cars. Gabby. Lucinda rolls her eyes. Have you lost your mind? A Volvo in the interior with the way things are. Gabriella holds up her hands. All right. All right. There's also the Datsun. I don't want to put anyone out, Yolanda says. She has sat back quietly, hoping she has learned, at last, to let the mighty wave of tradition roll on through her life and break on some other female shore. She plans to bob up again after the many don'ts to do what she wants. From the corner of her eye she sees Illuminata enter with a box of matches on a small silver tray. "I'll take a bus." "A bus?" The whole group bursts out laughing. The little cousins come forward to join the laughter, eager to be a part of the adult merriment. "Yolanda, mi amor, you have been gone long," Lucinda teases. "Can't you see it?" She laughs. Yo-Yo climbing into an old camioneta with all the campesinos and their fighting cocks and their goats and their pigs. Giggles and head shakings. "I can take care of myself," Yolanda reassures them. "But what's this other trouble you keep mentioning? Don't listen to them." Gabriella waves her hand as if scaring off an annoying fly. Her fingers are long and tapered, her wedding and engagement rings have been welded together into one thick band. "It's easier this way," she once explained, handing the ring over to Yolanda to try on. "There have been some incidents lately," Tia Carmen says in a quiet voice that does not brook contradiction. She, after all, is the reigning head of the family. Almost as if to prove her point, a private guard, his weapons clicking, passes by on the side of the patio open to the back gardens. He wears an army-type khaki uniform, a gun swung over his shoulder. A tall wall has surrounded the compound for as far back as Yolanda can remember, a wall she believed as a child was there to keep the sea back in case during a hurricane it rose up to the hillside the family houses were built on. Things are looking ugly. Tia Flor again smiles brightly. In the Renaissance book of acting, this grimace of a smile might be captioned, "The lady is caught in a smile she cannot escape." There's talk, you know, of gorillas in the mountains. Gabriella crinkles her nose. Mundin says that talk is only talk. Illuminata has now crept forward to the edge of the circle to offer the matches to her mistress. In the fading light of the patio, Yolanda cannot make out the expression on the dark face. Tia Carmen rises to approach the cake. She begins lighting candles and laying the spent matches on the tray Illuminata holds out to her. One light for Santo Domingo, one for Santiago, one for Puerto Plata. The children plead to be allowed to light the remaining cities, but no, Tia Carmen tells them, they may blow out the candles and, of course, eat the cake. Lighting is grown-up business. Once the candles are all ablaze, the cousins and aunts and children gather around and sing a rousing, Bienvenida a Ti, to the tune of, Happy Birthday. Yolanda gazes at the cake. Below her blazes the route she has worked out on the map for herself, north of the city through the mountains to the coast. As the singing draws to a close, the cousins urge her to make a wish. She leans forward and shuts her eyes. There is so much she wants, it is hard to single out one wish. There have been too many stops on the road of the last 29 years since her family left this island behind. She and her sisters have led such turbulent lives, so many husbands, homes, jobs, wrong turns among them. But look at her cousins, women with households and authority in their voices. Let this turn out to be my home, Yolanda wishes. She pictures the maids in their quiet, mysterious cluster at the end of the patio, Altagracia with her hands in her lap. By the time she opens her eyes, ready, a half-dozen little substitute puffs have blown out all the candles. There is a burst of clapping. Small arguments erupt over dividing the cake's cities. Lucinda's two boys both want Santiago since they went gliding there last weekend. Lucinda's girl and Carmencita's girl both insist on the capital because that's where they were born, but one agrees to cede the capital if she can have La Romana, where the family has a beach house. But, of course, La Romana has already been spoken for by Tia Flor's little goddaughter, who suffers from asthma and shouldn't be contradicted. Lucinda, whose voice is hoarse with disciplining the rowdy crew, hands Yolanda the knife. It's your cake, Yo-Yo. You decide. The road up through the foothills is just wide enough for two small cars, and so at each curve, as she has been instructed, Yolanda slows and taps her horn. Just past one bad curve, a small shrine has been erected, La Virgin surrounded by 3 concrete crosses recently whitewashed. She pulls the Datsun over and enjoys her first solitary moment since her arrival. Every compound outing has been hosted by one gracious aunt or another, presenting the landscape as if it were a floor show mounted for her niece's appreciation. All around her are the foothills, a dark enormous green, the sky more a brightness than a color. A breeze blows through the palms below, rustling their branches, so they whisper like voices. Here and there a braid of smoke rises up from a hillside, a campesino and his family living out their solitary life. This is what she has been missing all these years without really knowing that she has been missing it. Standing here in the quiet, she believes she has never felt at home in the States, never. When she first hears it, she thinks it is her own motor she has forgotten to turn off, but the sound grows into a pained roar, as if the engine were falling apart. Yolanda makes out an undertow of men's voices. Quickly, she gets into the car, locks the door, and pulls back onto the road, hugging her right side. A bus comes lurching around the curve, obscuring her view. Belching exhaust, the driver saluting or warning with a series of blasts on his horn. It is an old army bus, the official name brushed over with paint that doesn't quite match. The passengers see her only at the last moment, and all up and down her side of the bus, men poke out of the windows, hooting and yelling, holding out bottles and beckoning to her. She speeds up and leaves them behind, the quiet, well-oiled Datsun climbing easily up the snaky highway. The radio is all static like the sound of the crunching metal of a car, the faint, blurry voice on the airwaves her own, trapped inside a wreck, calling for help. In English or Spanish? She wonders. That poet she met at Lucinda's party the night before argued that no matter how much of it one lost, in the midst of some profound emotion, one would revert to one's mother tongue. He put Yolanda through a series of situations. What language, he asked, looking pointedly into her eyes, did she love in? The hills begin to plane out into a high plateau, and the road widens. Left and right, roadside stands begin appearing. Yolanda keeps an eye out for guavas. Piled high on wooden stands are fruits Yolanda hasn't seen in years, pinkish yellow mangoes, and tamarind pods oozing their rich sap, and small cashew fruits strung on a rope to keep them from bruising each other. Strips of meat, buzzing with flies, hang from the windows of butcher stalls. It is hard to believe the poverty the radio commentators keep talking about. There seems to be plenty here to eat except for guavas. The fruit stands behind her now. Yolanda approaches a compound very like her family's in the capital. A high concrete wall continues for about a quarter of a mile. A guard rises to his post beyond an iron grillwork gate. He seems glimpsed through the flowering bars, a man locked in a strangely gorgeous prison. Beyond him up the shady driveway is a THRESTRE country house, a wide veranda all the way around it. Parked at the door is a chocolate-brown Mercedes. Perhaps the owners have come up to their country home to avoid the troubles in the capital. They are probably relatives. The dozen rich families have intermarried so many times that family trees are tangles of roots. In fact, her aunts have given her a list of names of uncles and aunts and cousins she might call on along her way. By each name is a capsule description of what Yolanda might remember of that relative, the one with the kidney bean swimming pool, the fat one, the one who was an ambassador. Before she even left the compound, Yolanda put the list away in the glove compartment. She is going to be just fine on her own. A small village spreads out before her. Altamira, say the rippling letters on the corrugated tin roof of the first house. A little cluster of houses on either side of the road. Altamira is just the place to stretch her legs before what she has heard is a steep and slightly, her aunts warned, very dangerous descent to the coast. Yolanda pulls up at a cantina, its thatched roof held up by several posts, its floor poured cement, and in its very center, a lone picnic table over which a swarm of flies hover. Tacked to one of the central posts is a yellowing poster for Palmolive soap. A creamy, blonde woman luxuriates under a refreshing shower, her head thrown back in seeming ecstasy, her mouth opened in a wordless cry. "Que buenas!" Yolanda calls out. An old woman emerges from a shack behind the cantina, buttoning up a torn house dress. She is followed closely by a little boy, who keeps ducking behind her whenever Yolanda smiles at him. Asking his name drives him further into the folds of the old woman's skirt. "You must excuse him, Donna," the woman apologizes. "He's not used to being among people. People with money who drive through Altamira to the beach resorts on the north coast," she means. "Your name," the old woman repeats, as if Yolanda hasn't asked him in Spanish. The little boy mumbles at the ground. "Speak up," the old woman scolds, but her voice betrays pride when she speaks up for him. "This little know-nothing is Jose Duarte Sanchez y Mela." Yolanda laughs. A lot of names for such a little boy, the surnames of the country's 3 liberators. Can I serve the dona in any way? The old woman asks. Fun refresco. Juna Coca-Cola. By the pride in her voice, Yolanda understands the old woman wants to treat her to the best on her menu. I'll tell you what I would like. Yolanda gives the tree line beyond the old woman's shack a glance. Are there any guavas around? The old woman's face scrunches up. Jaguayaba, she murmurs, and thinks to herself a second. Why, they grow all around, dona. But I can't say as I've seen any lately. With your permission, Jose Duarte has joined a group of little boys who have come out of nowhere and are milling around the car, boasting how many automobiles they have ridden in. At Yolanda's mention of guavas, he springs forward, pointing across the road towards the summit of the western hills. I know where there's a whole grove of ripe ones. Behind him, his little companions nod. Go on, then. His grandmother stamps her foot as if she were scatting an animal. Get the dona some. A few boys dash across the road and disappear up a steep path on the hillside, but before Jose can follow, Yolanda calls him back. She wants to go along too. The little boy looks towards his grandmother, unsure of what to think. The old woman shakes her head. The dona will get hot, her nice clothes will get all dirty. Jose will bring the dona as many guavas as she is wanting. But they taste so much better when you've picked them yourself. Yolanda hears the edge in her voice. The old woman has turned into the long arm of her family. The few boys who have stayed behind with Jose have again congregated around the car. Each one claims to be guarding it for the dona. It occurs to Yolanda that there is a way to make this a treat all the way around. What do you say we take the car? The little boys cheer. Now that is not a bad idea, the old woman agrees. If the dona insists on going, she can take that dirt road up ahead and then cross over onto the road that is paved all the way to the coffee barns. The old woman points south in the direction of the big house. Many workers take that shortcut to work. They pile into the car, half a dozen little boys in the back, and Jose is co-pilot in the passenger seat beside Yolanda. They turn onto a bumpy road off the highway, which grows bumpier and bumpier as it climbs up into wilder, more desolate country. Branches scrape the sides and pebbles pelt the underside of the car. Yolanda wants to turn back, but there is no room. Finally, with a great snapping of twigs and thrashing of branches across the windshield, as if the countryside is loath to release them, the car bursts forth onto smooth pavement and the light of day. On either side of the road are groves of guava trees. The boys who have gone ahead on foot are already pulling down branches and shaking loose a rain of guavas. Yolanda eats several right on the spot, relishing the slightly bumpy feel of the skin in her hand, devouring the crunchy, sweet white meat. The boys watch her. The group scatters to harvest the guavas. Yolanda and Jose, partners, wander far from the path that cuts through the grove. Soon they are bent almost double to avoid getting entangled in the thick canopy of branches overhead. Each addition to Yolanda's beach basket causes a spill from the stash already piled high above the brim. The way back seems much longer than the way there. Yolanda begins to worry that they are lost, and then, the way worry sprouts worry, it strikes her that they haven't heard or seen the other boys in quite a while. The lattice work of branches reveals glimmers of a fading sky. The image of the guard in his elaborate flowering prison flashes through her head. The rustling leaves of the guava trees echo the warnings of her old aunts. You will get lost, you will get kidnapped, you will get raped, you will get killed. Just ahead, the thicket of guava branches clears, and there is the footpath, and beyond, the gratifying sight of the car still on the side of the road. It is a pleasure to stand upright again. Jaws 6 rests his burden on the ground and straightens his back to full measure. Yolanda looks up at the sky. The sun is low on the western horizon. The others must have gone to gather kindling, Jose observes. Yolanda glances at her watch. It is past 6 o'clock. At this rate, she will never make the north coast by nightfall. She hurries Jose back to the car, where they find a heap of guavas the other boys left behind on the shoulder of the road. Enough guavas to appease even the greediest island Santo for life. They pack the trunk quickly, and climb in, but the car has not gone a foot before it lurches forward with a horrible hobble. Yolanda closes her eyes and lays her head down on the wheel, then glances over at Jose. His eyes are searching the inside of the car for a clue as to what could have happened. This child won't know how to change a flat tire either. Soon the sun will set and night will fall swiftly, no lingering dusk as in the States. She explains to Jose that they have a flat tire and must go back down the road to the big house. Whoever tends to the brown Mercedes will surely know how to change a tire. With your permission, Jose offers. The Dona can just wait in the car, and he will be back in no time with someone from the Miranda place. Miranda, Yolanda leans over and gets her aunt's list out of the glove compartment, and sure enough, there they are. Tia Marina y Tio Alejandro Miranda Altos de Altamira. A note elaborates that Tio Alejandro was the one who used to own English saddle horses and taught you 4 girls to ride. All right, she says to the boy. I'll tell you what. She points to her watch. If you're back by the time this hand is over here, I'll give you, she holds up one finger, $1. The boy's mouth falls open. In no time, he has shot out of his side of the car and is headed at a run toward the Miranda place. Yolanda climbs out as well and walks down a pace, until the boy has disappeared in one of the turnings of the road. From the footpath that cuts through the grove on the opposite side of the road, she hears the sound of branches being thrust aside, twigs snapping underfoot. 2 men, one short and dark, and the other slender and light-skinned, emerge. They wear ragged work clothes stained with patches of sweat, their faces are drawn. Machetes hang from their belts. The men's faces snap awake at the sight of her. Then they look beyond her at the car. The darker man speaks first. Yours. Is there some problem? He speaks up again. The taller one is looking her up and down with interest. They are now both in front of her on the road, blocking any escape. Both she has sized them up as well are strong and quite capable of catching her if she makes a run for it. Not that she can move, for her legs seem suddenly to have been hammered into the ground beneath her. She considers explaining that she is just out for a drive before dinner at the big house, so that these men will think someone knows where she is, someone will come look. Ing for her if they try to carry her off. But her tongue feels as if it has been stuffed in her mouth like a rag to keep her quiet. The 2 men exchange a look, it seems to Yolanda, of collusion. Then the shorter, darker one speaks up again. Senorita, are you all right? He peers at her. He is a short man, no taller than Yolanda, but he gives the impression of being quite large, for he is broad and solid, like something not yet completely carved out of a piece of wood. His companion is slim and tall and of a rich honey brown color that matches his honey brown eyes. Anywhere else, Yolanda would find him extremely attractive, but here on a lonely road, with the sky growing darker by seconds, his good looks seem dangerous, a lure to catch her off her guard. Can we help you? The shorter man repeats. The handsome one smiles knowingly. 2 long, deep dimples appear like gashes on either side of his mouth. Americana, he says to the darker man, pointing to the car. No comprehend. The darker man narrows his eyes and studies Yolanda a moment. J. Americana, he asks her, as if not quite sure what to make of her. She has been too frightened to carry out any strategy, but now a road is opening before her. She clasps her hands on her chest, she can feel her pounding heart and nods. Then, as if the admission itself loosens her tongue, she begins to speak English, a few words of apology at first, then a great flood of explanation, how it happens that she is on a back road by herself. Her craving for guavas, having never learned to change a flat. The 2 men stare at her, uncomprehending, rendered docile by her gibberish. Only when she mentions the name Miranda do their eyes light up with respect. She is saved. Yolanda makes the motions of pumping. The darker man looks at his companion, who shrugs, baffled as well. Yolanda waves for them to follow her. And as if after dragging up roots, she has finally managed to yank them free of the soil they have clung to, she finds she can move her own feet toward the car. The small group stands staring at the sagging tire a moment, the 2 men kicking at it as if punishing it for having failed the senorita. They squat by the passenger's side, conversing in low tones. Yolanda leads the men to the rear of the car, where they lift the spare out of its sunken nest, then set to work fitting the interlocking pieces of the jack, unpacking the tools from the deeper hollows of the trunk. They lay their machetes down on the side of the road, out of the way. Above them, the sky is purple with twilight. The sun breaks on the hilltops, spilling its crimson yolk. Once the flat has been replaced with the spare, the 2 men lift the deflated tire into the trunk and put away the tools. They hand Yolanda her keys. "I'd like to give you something," she begins, but the English words are hollow on her tongue. She rummages in her purse and draws out a sheaf of bills, rolls them up and offers them to the men. The shorter man holds up his hand. Yolanda can see where he has scraped his hand on the pavement and blood has dried dark streaks on his palm. "No, no, señorita. Nuestro placer." Yolanda turns to the taller one. "Please," she says, urging the bills on him. But he too looks down at the ground. "Illumi." Not his gesture, Jose's gesture. Quickly, she stuffs the bills in his pocket. The two men pick up their machetes and raise them to their shoulders like soldiers their guns. The tall man motions towards the big house. "Directo, Mirandas." He enunciates the words carefully. Yolanda looks in the direction of his hand. In the faint light of what is left of day, she can barely make out the road ahead. It is as if the guava grove has grown into the road and woven its mat of branches tightly in all directions. She reaches for each man's hand to shake. The shorter man holds his back at first, as if not wanting to dirty her hand, but finally, after wiping it on the side of his pants, he gives it to Yolanda. The skin feels rough and dry like the bark of trees. Yolanda climbs into the car while the two men wait a moment on the shoulder to see if the tire will hold. She eases out onto the pavement and makes her way slowly down the road. When she looks for them in her rearview mirror, they have disappeared into the darkness of the guava grove. Ahead, her lights catch the figure of a small boy. Yolanda leans over and opens the door for him. The overhead light comes on, the boy's face is working back tears. He is cradling an arm. "The guardia hit me. He said I was telling stories. No Dominicano with a car would be out at this hour getting gay a boss. Don't you worry, Jose." Yolanda pats the boy. She can feel the bony shoulder through the thin fabric of his shirt. "You can still have your dollar. You did your part." But his shame seems to obscure any pleasure he might feel. In her offer, Yolanda tries to distract him by asking what he will buy with his money, what he most craves, thinking that on a subsequent visit, she might bring him his own little antojo. But Jose Duarte Sanchez y Mela says nothing, except a mumbled gracias when she lets him off at the cantina with several more than his promised dollar. In the glow of the headlights, Yolanda makes out the figure of the old woman in the black square of her doorway, waving goodbye. And above the picnic table on a near post, the palmolive woman's skin gleams a rich white, her head is still thrown back, her mouth still opened as if she is calling someone over a great distance. The kiss Sophia even after they'd been married and had their own families and often couldn't make it for other occasions, the four daughters always came home for their father's birthday. They would gather together, without husbands, would-be husbands, or bring home work. For this too was part of the tradition, the daughters came home alone. The apartment was too small for everyone, the father argued. Surely their husbands could spare them for one overnight? The husbands would just as soon have not gone to their in-laws, but they felt annoyed at the father's strutting. "When's he going to realize you've grown up? You sleep with us. He's almost 70, for God's sake," the daughters said, defending the father. They were passionate women, but their devotions were like roots, they were sunk into the past towards the old man. So for one night every November the daughters turned back into their father's girls. In the cramped living room, surrounded by the dark oversized furniture from the old house they grew 24 up in, they were children again in a smaller, simpler version of the world. There was the prodigal scene at the door. The father opened his arms wide and welcomed them in his broken English, "This is your home, and never you should forget it." Inside, the mother fussed at them, their sloppy clothes, their long, loose hair, their looking tired, too skinny, too made up, and so on. After a few glasses of wine, the father started in on what should be done if he did not live to see his next birthday. "Come on, Poppy," his daughters coaxed him, as if it were a modesty of his, to perish, and they had to talk him into staying alive. After his cake and candles, the father distributed bulky envelopes that felt as if they were padded, and they were, no less than several hundreds in bills, 10s, and 20s and 5s, all arranged to face the same way, the top one signed with the father's name, branding them his. Why not checks? The daughters would wonder later, gossiping together in the bedroom, counting their money to make sure the father wasn't playing favorites. Was there some illegality that the father stashed such sums away? Was he? None of the daughters really believed this, but to contemplate it was a wonderful little explosion in their heads. Was he maybe dealing drugs or doing abortions in his office? At the table there was always the pretense of trying to give the envelopes back. No, Poppy, it's your birthday, after all. The father told them there was plenty more where that had come from. The revolution in the old country had failed. Most of his comrades had been killed or bought off. He had escaped to this country. And now it was every man for himself, so what he made was for his girls. The father never gave his daughters money when their husbands were around. They might receive the wrong idea, the father once said, and although none of the daughters knew specifically what the father meant, they all understood what he was saying to them: don't bring the men home for my birthday. But this year, for his 70th birthday, the youngest daughter, Sophia, wanted the celebration at her house. Her son had been born that summer, and she did not want to be traveling in November with a 4-month-old and her little girl. And yet, she, of all the daughters, did not want to be the absent one, because for the first time since she'd run off with her husband 6 years ago, she and her father were on speaking terms. In fact, the old man had been out to see her, or really to see his grandson, twice. It was a big deal that Sophia had had a son. He was the first male born into the family in 2 generations. In fact, the baby was to be named for the grandfather Carlos, and his middle name was to be Sophia's maiden name, and so, what the old man had never hoped for with his harem of 4 girls, as he liked to joke, his own name was to be kept going in this new country. During his 2 visits, the grandfather had stood guard by the crib all day, speaking to little Carlos. Charles V, Charles Dickens, Prince Charles. He enumerated the names of famous Charleses in order to stir up genetic ambition in the boy. Charlemagne, he cooed at him also, for the baby was large and big-boned with blonde fuzz on his pale pink skin, and blue eyes just like his German father's. All the grandfather's Caribbean fondness for a male heir and for fair Nordic looks had surfaced. There was now good blood in the family against a future bad choice by one of its women. You can be president, you were born here, the grandfather crooned. You can go to the moon, maybe even to Mars by the time you are of my age. His macho baby talk brought back Sophia's old antagonism towards her father. How obnoxious for him to go on and on like that while beside him stood his little granddaughter, wide-eyed and sad at all the things her baby brother, no bigger than one of her dolls, was going to be able to do just because he was a boy. Make him stop, please, Sophia asked her husband. Otto was considered the jolly, good-natured one among the brothers-in-law. The Kemp counselor, his sisters-in-law teased. Otto approached the grandfather. Both men looked fondly down at the new Viking. You can be as great a man as your father, the grandfather said. This was the first compliment the father-in-law had ever paid any son-in-law in the family. There was no way Otto was going to mess with the old man now. He is a good boy, is he not, Poppy? Otto's German accent thickened with affection. He clapped his hand on his father-in-law's shoulders. They were friends now. But though the father had made up with his son-in-law, there was still a strain with his own daughter. When he had come to visit, she embraced him at the door, but he stiffened and politely shrugged her off. Let me put down these heavy bags, Sophia. He had never called her by her family pet name, Fifi, even when she lived at home. He had always had problems with his maverick youngest, and her running off hadn't helped. I don't want loose women in my family, he had cautioned all his daughters. Warnings were delivered communally, for even though there was usually the offending daughter of the moment, every woman's character could use extra scolding. His daughters had had to put up with this kind of attitude in an unsympathetic era. They grew up in the late 60s. Those were the days when wearing jeans and hoop earrings, smoking a little dope, and sleeping with their classmates were considered political acts against the military-industrial complex. But standing up to their father was a different matter altogether. Even as grown women, they lowered their voices in their father's earshot when alluding to their body's pleasure. Professional women, too, all 3 of them, with degrees on the wall. Sophia was the one without the degrees. She had always gone her own way, though she downplayed her choices, calling them accidents. Among the 4 sisters, she was considered the plain one, with her tall, big-boned body and large-featured face. And yet, she was the one with non-stop boyfriends, her sisters joked, not without wonder and a little envy. They admired her and were always asking her advice about men. The third daughter had shared a room with Sophia growing up. She liked to watch her sister move about their room, getting ready for bed, brushing, and arranging her hair in a clip before easing herself under the sheets as if someone were waiting for her there. In the dark, Fifi gave off a fresh, wholesome smell of clean flesh. It gave solace to the third daughter, who was always so tentative and terrified and had such troubles with men. Her sisters. Breathing in the dark room was like having a powerful, tamed animal at the foot of her bed ready to protect her. The youngest daughter had been the first to leave home. She had dropped out of college, in love. She had taken a job as a secretary and was living at home because her father had threatened to disown her if she moved out on her own. On her vacation she went to Colombia because her current boyfriend was going, and since she couldn't spend an overnight with him in New York, she had to travel thousands of miles to sleep with him. In Bogota, they discovered that once they could enjoy the forbidden fruit, they lost their appetite. They broke up. She met a tourist on the street, some guy from Germany, just like that. The woman had not been without a boyfriend for more than a few days of her adult life. They fell in love. On her way home, she tossed her diaphragm in the first bin at Kennedy Airport. She was taking no chances. But the father could tell. For months, he kept an eye out. First chance he got, he went through her drawers, looking for my nail clippers, and there he found her packet of love letters. The German man's small, correct handwriting mentioned unmentionable things. Bed conversations were recreated on the thin blue sheets of aerogram letters. What is the meaning of this? The father shook the letters in her face. They had been sitting around the table, the four sisters, gabbing, and the father had come in, beating the packet against his leg like a whip, the satin hair ribbon unraveling where he had untied it, and then wrapped it round and round in a mad effort to contain his youngest daughter's misbehavior. "Give me those," she cried, lunging at him. The father raised his hand with the letters above both their heads like the Statue of Liberty with her freedom torch, but he had forgotten this was the daughter who was as tall as he was. She clawed his arm down and clutched the letters to herself as if they were her baby he'd plucked from her breast. It seemed a biological rather than a romantic fury. After his initial shock, the father regained his own fury. "Has he deflowered you? That's what I want to know. Have you gone behind the palm trees? Are you dragging my good name through the dirt? That is what I would like to know." The father was screaming crazily in the youngest daughter's face. Question after question, not giving the daughter a chance to answer. His face grew red with fury, but hers was more terrible in its impassivity, a pale ivory moon, pulling and pulling at the tide of his anger, until it seemed he might drown in his own outpouring of fury. Her worried sisters stood up, one at each arm, coaxing him like nurses, another touching the small of his back as if he were a feverish boy. "Come on, Poppy, simmer down now. Take it easy. Let's talk. We're a family, after all. Are you a whore?" the father interrogated his daughter. There was spit on the daughter's cheeks from the closeness of his mouth to her face. "It's none of your fucking business," she said in a low, ugly-sounding voice like the snarl of an animal who could hurt him. "You have no right at all, to go through my stuff or read my mail." Tears spurted out of her eyes, her nostrils flared. The father's mouth opened in a little zero of shock. Quietly, Sophia drew herself up and left the room. Usually, in her growing up tantrums, this daughter would storm out of the house and come back hours later, placated, the sweetness in her nature reasserted, bearing silly gifts for everyone in the family, refrigerator magnets, little stuffed hairballs with roll-around eyeballs. But this time they could hear her upstairs, opening and closing her drawers, moving back and forth from the bed to the closet. Downstairs, the father prowled up and down the length of the rooms, his three daughters caging him while the other great power in the house, tidily as if she had all the time in the world, buttoned and folded all her clothes, packed all her bags, and left the house forever. She got herself to Germany somehow and got the man to marry her. To throw in the face of the father who was so ambitious for presidents and geniuses in the family, the German nobody turned out to be a world-class chemist. But the daughter's was not a petty nature. What did she care what Otto did for a living when she had shown up at his door and offered herself to him? "I can love you as much as anybody else," she said. "If you can do the same for me, let's get married. Come on in and let's talk," Otto had said, or so the story went. "Yes or no," Sophia answered. Just like that on a snowy night, someone at his door and a cold draft coming in. I couldn't let her freeze, Otto boasted later. Like hell you couldn't. Sophia planted a large hand on his shoulder, and anyone could see how it must be between them in the darkness of their lovemaking. On their honeymoon, they traveled to Greece, and Sophia sent her mother and father and sisters postcards like any newlywed. We're having a great time. Wish you were here. But the father kept to his revenge. For months no one could mention the daughter's name in his presence, though he kept calling them all Sophia and quickly correcting himself. When the daughter's baby girl was born, his wife put her foot down. Let him carry his grudge to the grave. She was going out to Michigan, where Otto had relocated, to see her first grandchild. Last minute, the father relented and went along, but he might as well have stayed away. He was grim and silent the whole visit, no matter how hard Sophia and her sisters tried to engage him in conversation. Banishment was better than this cold shoulder. But Sophia tried again. On the old man's next birthday, she appeared at the apartment with her little girl. Surprise. There was a reconciliation of sorts. The father first tried to shake hands with her. Thwarted, he then embraced her stiffly before taking the baby in his arms under the watchful eye of his wife. Every year after that, the daughter came for her father's birthday, and in the way of women, soothed and stitched and patched over the hurt feelings. But there it was under the social fabric, the raw wound. The father refused to set foot in his daughter's house. They rarely spoke. The father said public things to her in the same tone of voice he used with his sons-in-law. But now his 70th birthday was coming up, and he had agreed to have the celebration at Sophia's house. The christening for little Carlos was scheduled for the morning, so the big event would be Papi Carlos's party that night. It was a coup for the youngest daughter to have gathered the scattered family in the Midwest for a weekend. But the real coup was how Sophia had managed to have the husbands included this year. The husbands are coming, the husbands are coming, the sisters joked. Sophia passed the compliment off on little Carlos. The boy had opened the door for the other men in the family. But the coup the youngest daughter most wanted was to reconcile with her father in a big way. She would throw the old man a party he wouldn't forget. For weeks she planned what they would eat, where they would all sleep, the entertainment. She kept calling up her sisters with every little thing to see what they thought. Mostly, they agreed with her: a band, paper hats, balloons, buttons that broadcast the world's greatest dad. Everything overdone and silly and devoted the way they knew the father would like it. Sophia briefly considered a belly dancer or a girl who'd pop out of a cake. But the third daughter, who had become a feminist in the wake of her divorce, said she considered such locker room entertainments offensive. A band with music was what she'd pitch in on. Her married sisters could split it 3 ways if they wanted to be sexists. With great patience, Sophia created a weekend that would offend no one. They were going to have a good time in her house for the old man's 70th, if it killed her. The night of the party, the family ate an early dinner before the band and the guests arrived. Each daughter toasted both Carloses. The sons-in-law called Big Carlos, Papi. Little Carlos, looking very much like a little girl in his long, white christening gown, bawled the whole time, and his poor mother had not a moment's peace between serving the dinner she'd prepared for the family and giving him his. The phone kept ringing. Relatives from the old country calling with congratulations for the old man. The toasts the daughters had prepared kept getting interrupted. Even so, their father's eyes glazed with tears more than once as the 4 girls went through their paces. He looked old tonight, every single one of his 70 years was showing. Perhaps it was that too much wine had darkened his complexion, and his white hair and brows and mustache stood out unnaturally white. He perked up a little for his gifts, though. Gadgets and books and desk trophies from his daughters, and cards with long notes penned inside, to the best, dearest Papi in the world, each one of which the old man wanted to read out loud. No you don't, Papi, they're private, his daughters chimed in, crowding around him, wanting to spare each other the embarrassment of having their gushing made public. His wife gave him a gold watch. The third daughter teased that that's how companies retired their employees, but when her mother made angry eyes at her, she stopped. Then there were the men gifts, belts and credit card wallets from the sons-in-law. Things I really need. The father was gracious. He stacked up the gift cards and put them away in his pocket to pore over later. The sons-in-law all knew that the father was watching them, jealously, for signs of indifference or self-interest. As for his girls, even after their toasts were given, the gifts opened, and the father had borne them out of the way with the help of his little granddaughter, even then, the daughters felt that there was something else he had been waiting for which they had not yet given him. But there was still plenty of party left to make sure he got whatever it was he needed for the long, lonely year ahead. The band arrived, 3 middle-aged men, each with a silver wave slicked back with too much hair cream. Danny and his boys set up a placard with their name against the fireplace. There was one on an accordion, another on a fiddle, and a third was miscellaneous on maracas and triangle and drums when needed. They played movie themes, polkas, anything familiar you could hum along to. The corny songs were all dedicated to Poppy or his lovely lady. The father liked the band. Nice choice / he congratulated Otto. The youngest daughter's temper flared easily with all she'd had to drink and eat. She narrowed her eyes at her smiling husband and put a hand on her hip, as if Otto had lifted a finger during her long months of planning. The guests began to arrive, many with tales of how they'd gotten lost on the way. The suburbs were dark and intricate like mazes with their courts and cul-de-sacs. Otto's unmarried colleagues looked around the room, trying to single out the recently divorced sister they'd heard so much about. But there was no one as beautiful and funny and talented as Sophia had boasted the third oldest would be. Most of these friends were half in love with Sophia anyway, and it was she they sought out in the crowded room. There was a big chocolate cake in the shape of a heart set out on the long buffet with 71 candles, one for good luck. The granddaughter and her aunts had counted them and planted them diagonally across the heart, joke candles that wouldn't blow out. Later, they burned a flaming arrow that would not quit. The bar was next to the heart, and by midnight, when the band broke out again with "Happy Birthday, Poppy," everyone had had too much to eat and drink. They'd been playing party games on and off all night. The band obliged with musical chairs, but after 2 of the dining room chairs were broken, they left off playing. The third daughter, especially, had gotten out of hand, making musical chairs of every man's lap. The father sat without speaking. He gazed upon the scene disapprovingly. In fact, the older the evening got, the more withdrawn the father had become. Surrounded by his daughters and their husbands and fancy, intelligent, high-talking friends, he seemed to be realizing that he was just an old man sitting in their houses, eating up their roast lamb, impinging upon their lives. The daughters could almost hear his thoughts inside their own heads. He, who had paid to straighten their teeth and smooth the accent out of their English in expensive schools, he was nothing to them now. Everyone in this room would survive him, even the silly men in the band who seemed like boys. Imagine making a living out of playing birthday songs. How could they ever earn enough money to give their daughters pretty clothes and send them to Europe during the summers so they wouldn't get bored? Where were the world's men any more? Every last one of his sons-in-law was a kid, he could see that clearly. Even Otto, the famous scientist, was a schoolboy with a pencil, doing his long division. The new son-in-law he even felt sorry for. He could see this husband would give out on his strong-willed second daughter. Already she had him giving her back rubs and going for cigarettes in the middle of the night. But he needn't worry about his girls. Or his wife, for that matter. There she sat, pretty and slim as a girl, smiling coyly at everyone when a song was dedicated to her. 8, maybe 9, months he gave her of widowhood, and then she'd find someone to grow old with on his life insurance. The third daughter thought of a party game to draw her father out. She took one of the baby's soft receiving blankets, blindfolded her father, and led him to a chair at the center of the room. The women clapped. The men sat down. The father pretended he didn't understand what all his daughters were up to. "How does one play this game, Mommy?" "You're on your own, Dad," the mother said, laughing. She was the only one in the family who called him by his American name. "Are you ready, Poppy?" the oldest asked. "I am perfect ready," he replied in his heavy accent. "Okay, now, guess who this is?" the oldest said. She always took charge. This is how they worked things among the daughters. The father nodded, his eyebrows shot up. He held onto his chair, excited, a little scared, like a boy about to be asked a hard question he knows the answer to. The oldest daughter motioned to the third daughter, who tiptoed into the circle the women had made around the old man. She gave him a daughterly peck on the cheek. "Who was that, Poppy?" the oldest asked. He was giggling with pleasure and could not get the words out at first. He had had too much to drink. That was Mommy, he said in a coy little voice. No. Wrong, all the women cried out. Carla, he guessed the oldest. He was going down the line. Wrong. More shouts. Sandy? Yo-yo. You guessed it / his third oldest said. The women clapped, some bent over in hilarious laughter. Everyone had had too much to drink. And the old man was having his good time too. Okay, here's another coming at you. The eldest took up the game again. She put her index finger to her lips, gave everyone a meaningful glance, quietly circled the old man, and kissed him from behind on top of his head. Then she tiptoed back to where she had been standing when she had first spoken. Who was that, Poppy? She asked, extra innocent. Mommy. His voice rode up, exposed and vulnerable. Then it sank back into its certainties. That was Mommy. Count me out, his wife said from the couch where she'd finally given in to exhaustion. The father never guessed any of the other women in the room. That would have been disrespectful. Besides, their strange-sounding American names were hard to remember and difficult to pronounce. Still, he got the benefit of their kisses under cover of his daughters. Down the line, the father went each time, Carla. Sandy. Yo-yo. Sometimes, he altered the order, put the third daughter first or the oldest one second. Sophia had been in the bedroom, tending to her son, who was wild with all the noise in the house tonight. She came back into the living room, buttoning her dress front, and happened upon the game. Oh. She rolled her eyes. It's getting raunchy in here, HA. She worked her hips in a mock rotation, and the men all laughed. She thrust her girlfriends into the circle and whispered to her little girl to plant the next kiss on her grandfather's nose. The women all pecked and puckered at the old man's face. The second daughter sat briefly on his lap and clucked him under the chin. Every time the father took a wrong guess, the youngest daughter laughed loudly. But soon, she noticed that he never guessed her name. After all her hard work, she was not to be included in his daughter count. Damn him. She'd take her turn and make him know it was her. Quickly, she swooped into the circle and gave the old man a wet, open-mouthed kiss in his ear. She ran her tongue in the whorls of his ear and nibbled the tip. Then she moved back. Oh la la, the oldest said, laughing. Who was that, Poppy? The old man did not answer. The smile that had played on his lips throughout the game was gone. He sat up, alert. There was a long pause, everyone leaned forward, waiting for the father to begin with his usual, Mommy. But the father did not guess his wife's name. He tore at his blindfold as if it were a contagious body whose disease he might catch. The receiving blanket fell in a soft heap beside his chair. His face had darkened with shame at having his pleasure aroused in public by one of his daughters. He looked from one to the other. His gaze faltered. On the face of his youngest was the brilliant, impassive look he remembered from when she had snatched her love letters out of his hands. That's enough of that, he commanded in a low, furious voice. And sure enough, his party was over. The four girls Kayla, Yolanda,